And without further ado, and I will tell you this, that Don Casey could stand up here and do about 10 hours without a problem. The most difficult part, you know, those of you who've seen my presentation, and I will be at the Pachyderm Club on Monday giving another presentation that is specifically about regionalism, Thrive 2055. The difficulty is not in finding material, it's in not just giving it all to you. Don Casey, again, came up on his own. The donation jar was strictly, we'd like to help him with his gas. Without further ado, Mr. Don Casey, and you'll give your own introduction.
First, let me ask, do I need a microphone? Yes, okay, we have some yes, so I will endeavor to stay close to the microphone so you can hear me. If for some reason I step away and forget where I am, actually, just raise your hand so I can get back to the microphone. I must do something first. Stand up. This is my lovely wife, Nancy. My one and only, who has graciously allowed me to come up and speak to you today about something called sustainable development. Most people actually recognize this as Agenda 21, but actually sustainable development has a very long history in this country, both legislatively and also through other venues and other sphere of influence. So this is my effort to introduce you to something called sustainable development. Now, a good presenter always tries to tell you what he's going to tell you, and then tell you what he told you. So this is my effort in doing a job of being a good presenter, because you're going to see a look at sustainable development and what it actually means. We're going to start out with the global level. We're going to hear our national leaders stand on a global stage and speak about something called sustainable development. Then we're going to look at the national issue, National Environmental Policy Act, which was passed in 1969. I'll reference that several times during this presentation. It was actually passed by a liberal Congress in '69, and then they waited for President Nixon, a supposed conservative, to come into office and sign it into law. Not by coincidence, that was the first year, 1970, that we had the Earth Day celebration. Very important issue in our culture today. Then we're going to look at the state and local level, because this is already in your comprehensive plan. All the way back into the mid and early 90s, comprehensive plans across this country were adopting the tenets of sustainable development. We'll look at how that is actually going to affect your lifestyle, and indeed, I'm standing in an area right now where I recognize very concrete tenets of something called sustainable development. Just walk around and look at some of the bicycle placements that they have in this area, and you can begin to understand how that's one viable means of transportation. We actually have three. We have walking, public transportation, and bicycling. Other than that, transportation is to be restricted restrict you from using your automobile. And then we'll look at the purpose of government. That's the very last slide that you'll see today. Recognizing and understanding the problem, of course, is always 50% of the solution, and I'm very glad to say that Alabama is the very first government in this world to acknowledge the insidious nature of something called sustainable development. And it's not just Agenda 21. I know there are several states that are currently working on adoption of anti-Agenda 21 laws, and I want to make the point that in our law that was passed last year, it actually talks about other international law and ancillary plans of action that contravene or violate the constitutions of the state and federal government. So that needs to be included, and I think you'll see why as we run through this presentation. Sustainable development, in my opinion, is in fact a religion. I think after you see this presentation, you'll come to a very similar conclusion, at least for some people. This is really a cultural transformation for them, where they have adopted something called sustainable development, and in some cases, they may not even realize that the adoption has actually taken place. Again, it has a long history going all the way back to the 60s and 70s in the legislation, both state and federal. It is the basis upon which society is being transformed. So when you hear national leaders talk about transition, this is exactly what they're talking about. It is intended to be a self-regulating governance system. Governance is not government. It is the rules and regulations that govern the behavior of individuals, organizations, and companies. So when you hear the word governance, it is not representative government. It is a completely different set of governing rules that no one's going to put their hand on your shoulder. This is all a self-regulating governance system, and we'll look at one paragraph from Agenda 21, and I hope that we'll be able to clarify that. Now, this is a coalition now of government, corporations, and non-governmental organizations. There was actually over 1,500 non-governmental organizations that went to Rio in 1992, about 2 weeks prior to the official conference that was held there, and pledged to enact within their sphere of influence or through local ordinances, however they could, the tenets of something called sustainable development. You can go online and actually look at the platform that they agreed to. World Council of the Churches, Kiwanis, Lions Club at the international level, Chamber of Commerce, all of these organizations at the international level are well aware of something called sustainable development. Now, there is the World Business Council of Sustainable Development, and there are over 200 of such organizations and companies that have adopted something called sustainable development. I was up in Ohio just recently, and Cargill and Monsanto are very big in that area, and there's a lot of opposition to the genetically modified organisms that Monsanto has patented, and believe me, this is going to cause problems with those that know about heritage seed, because this propagates the tenets and traits of non-propagating seed within the heritage seed. So this is going to be a problem, and Monsanto is very aggressive at pushing this agenda. Monsanto is right there, Cargill is right there. So there were people in Ohio that are very aware of what is going on with those. There is also the United States Business Council for Sustainable Development. Believe me, these organizations require other companies that do business with them to adopt the tenets of sustainable development. Now, this is a slide I put together. Most of the slides that you're going to see from here on out are slides from proponents of sustainable development. I really believe that if we don't become aware of the tenets of this progressive socialist agenda and movement, it's going to end very much like World War II. The people in World War II in Germany were very adamant about their position, and believe me, the people that are pushing this agenda are just as adamant. If we don't become active and begin to understand what this is all about, the scope and breadth of it, we're going to be caught in the very same position that they were during World War II. Now, nothing here is conspiratorial. Believe me, a conspiracy is two or more individuals who in secret plot to commit an evil act. This is out in the open. I wouldn't know any of this unless it was all available. All you have to do is start looking, and you'll find this just a horn of plenty of information. And for instance, this is the cover page for the report that we submitted, the United States submitted to the United Nations, detailing what we have done in order to implement this concept of sustainable development. This is the report from 2002. It is 156 pages long. For instance, this area right in here received a community block development grant to remodel this whole area, and it looks like it's a very ongoing project right now. Community block development grants are threaded throughout this report to the United Nations. So if you receive money from the federal government, and I don't care what it's for, there are strings attached to it. Even I was talking to someone in Lewis County, Tennessee recently. They have a facelift grant where they're coming in and putting in a shiny new face on Main Street, and that money is a community block development grant. And the individual that was on the city council stood up and said, oh, well, we looked at it and there's no strings attached to it. And I said, well, that you may perceive that there's no strings, but part of the NEPA is to create a culturally and aesthetically pleasing community. So you're putting a facelift on and you're complying with that aesthetically pleasing tenet of NEPA. And by the way, it's money that we don't have. So as a conservative individual professing conservatism, here you are spending money that the federal government does not have. So it didn't take him long to begin to understand this was really not in his benefit, and it was to the detriment of future generations. Now, this is the index page for the 2002 conference held in Johannesburg. When I punch the button, you're going to see a total of 9 slides go across the screen. The first 7 are what was happening on stage. There is an individual who is supposed to be a very wise man talking to a young group of people, and he is explaining what is wrong with Mother Earth. And you'll see photographs of what was actually happening on stage. The individual has a very heavy accent, so I printed the words on the screen of what he had to say. After those 7 slides, you're going to hear Colin Powell, who was at the time Secretary of State for the 43rd president, President Bush of the United States, and he's going to stand and say that you and I and President Bush have an enduring commitment to sustainable development. So let me turn the speaker on.
Life began with the earth, then came the plants, the animals, and finally the human beings. Yes! We are all children of Mother Earth. That is why we must take care of her and be her custodians. She is the hand that feeds us and the heart that heals us. But I'm sad to say, we are failing. Greed and foolishness are eating deep into the fabric of humankind. We are failing to love and care for Mother Earth.
This summit has cemented a new vision of sustainable development. The Johannesburg Plan of Action consolidates our work plans into one common agenda that includes our best thinking on sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, President Bush and the American people have an enduring commitment to sustainable development.
Well, that was 2002, so let me speed forward to last year. This is, and by the way, these conferences are a celebration of what was originally done. So this was 2002, was a celebration of 1992. President Bush, the 41st President of the United States, went and signed this document. It actually has 3 treaties. It has 40 chapters. The 40 chapters in between the pages on this book are called soft law. There is a movement to make the soft law mandatory. It makes no difference whether it's made mandatory as if it was an international treaty or not. The tenets of this book are already in your comprehensive plan. You have a climate change program right here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and you have partnered with ICLEI, the International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives. They are on page 55 of this document, and they have been given the responsibility to help your community adopt the tenets of this document. So it makes no difference whether this becomes international law and binding or not. You already have it in this community. So now let me speed forward now to the next 10-year period, which was last year. And here we have the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, and this is what she had to say.
We have coalesced around an outcome document that marks a real advance for sustainable development. We know this is one of the most pressing matters of our time, because how we grow together over the long term isn't a question for only some countries. It is a question for all countries. A more prosperous future is within our reach, a future where all people benefit from sustainable development, no matter who they are or where they live. And that is why in the 21st century, the only viable development is sustainable development. We also have to be thinking different about development in our cities. Under the joint initiative on urban sustainability that President Rousseff and President Obama kicked off last year, we are bringing political officials from every level, from state, county, local, municipalities together, along with industry leaders and developers, to find creative ways to generate sustainable economic growth. Let's use the private sector, particularly the consumer goods companies, as they have agreed to do, to make sure they have sustainable supply chains, the right kind of packaging and marketing that puts the least amount of burden on the earth we share. Let's bring in the nonprofits, the civil society organizations, faith groups, individuals, all of us committed to realizing the sustainable development goals that we have embraced. We know that we will be judged not by what we say, nor even by what we intend to do, but by whether we deliver results for people alive today and whether we keep faith with future generations. I'm very honored to be here with all of you, and I pledge my country's, the Obama administration's, and my own personal efforts to continue our work together. We simply cannot afford to fail. Thank you all very much.
This is, and I need to mute this, for the sake of time constraints, this is Mrs. Googe. Now, Mrs. Googe is going to take about 5 minutes, and I don't want to take 5 minutes to run through what she actually had to say. She was testifying for the Livable Communities Act. She talks about what they're doing in her county. Her county was Carroll County, Maryland. She was a spokesperson for the National County Associations at the same time. She was talking about setting aside 100,000 acres of her county for green space, open space. It has a whole litany of names. She's taking money from the government coffers, no matter where that comes from, and from other places, foundations, in order to purchase land, take it off the tax rolls, take it out of production. In other words, the private landowner makes no profit off of that at all. There are no taxes paid of any kind, and you know who's going to make up the shortfall of taxes in that case. I was in Ohio talking about this very same program, and one county commissioner said, well, they want to take 200,000 acres of my county just for the very same program. Now, in this 5-minute video, she talks about sustainable development, just like Colin Powell just did, and just like the programs that you already have in written format talk about sustainable development. She also talked about carbon footprints and greenhouse gas emissions, all the same things that are laced throughout your specific comprehensive plan here in Chattanooga. Now, the good news is that her opponent ran on an anti-Agenda 21 program, soundly defeated her, and now he is busily rewriting the comprehensive plan and dismantling what this individual put in place. Unfortunately, the law that she was lobbying for in 2010 actually did pass, and this county, this region right here in the South, actually applied for a grant, but they did not receive the grant. But they're moving forward. They have other government money that is coming into this area and foundation money in order to implement something called Thrive 2055, which you're very familiar with already. And that now brings up my discussion a little bit. I'm just going to barely touch on Thrive 2055 because they're in their infancy. Even though the program and objectives are already set in concrete, they want to put on a face and air of public input before they tell you what they're going to do. In fact, it is a government-funded, primarily funded initiative. And this is one of the slides from their PowerPoint presentation. And it talks about the Greater Chattanooga Regional Growth Initiative. This was the year 2011, and I'm sure that started much before that, probably a year or two ahead. And it's looking at sustainable development form and building a resilient region. Now, this is the next slide in that slideshow presentation, and you can see that at the time there were 14 counties. I think, Karen, there are 16 counties currently. Yeah, so this was actually, there's 2 counties that were added to this program. And of course, that's a map. Now, it goes in and talks about formation of the new partnership. They had not, at this point, formally announced the coalition or consortium of entities that were coming together to put this act on for us. And it says the very first thing is state local, state, and federal governments are actually the main primary entities, and then you have regional organizations, and then you have the front group. You have the Chamber of Commerce for the city of Chattanooga, and of course we have philanthropical organizations, and then here are the main players, HUD, DOT, EPA, and they actually held webinars talking about this. So they are the primary movers and shakers behind this. Now, if you go to the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy for the, let's see, it's the Southeast Tennessee Development District, you will find this map and Thrive 2055 actually discussed. And it says in that economic development plan that this is a 40-year sustainability plan. So we have the regional planning districts for Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama involved in moving this forward, behind the scenes, of course. But go and look up the information. I mean, it's readily available. Now, this consortium has hired an outfit called Clarion, and Clarion says that we have now several states, and this gets into the greenhouse gas emission and one of the international treaties of Agenda 21. It's called the Climate Change Treaty currently. It used to be called the Kyoto Accords. And this PowerPoint presentation from Clarion gets in and talks about how many states have already adopted greenhouse gas emissions. Now, you have it in Chattanooga again, but Florida, New York, Virginia, California, and Washington, and now have 25 other states have climate action plans, and 16 states have established statewide greenhouse gas reduction targets, and 5 of those are mandatory. Now, this is kind of the soft sell, as I call it, because you can go to your local plans here in Chattanooga and it'll talk about what we need to do and things in order to prevent further harm to Mother Earth. Well, the sustainability actually involves all of the climate change plus building green. And like it says, sustainability is not just about building green, it involves development patterns. Mrs. Googe in her testimony said that the local government was going to determine where and when you could develop your property, no longer up to the private property owner. Then we're going to have mobility. We're going to have to reduce VMTs, vehicle miles traveled, and it's going to have to be done through regulations, I'm sure, because $10 on a gallon of gasoline is not going to be all that they want in their objective, even though $10 for a gallon of gas will go a long way. And then we have energy conservation. A lot of people are already aware of their smart meters, and we'll talk just a little bit about smart meters on your home because it will be able to turn off the electricity to your smart appliances, air conditioner, and refrigerator, or completely turn your whole house off if that's what is desired because you don't have enough carbon credits to operate your household. Environmental quality. If we don't begin to ask what these phrases mean, then we're caught in a situation where we have agreed to something that we don't know the fine print and the tenet. So if you hear environmental quality, you better stop and ask that official, what does that mean? And if it is a really important question, ask it in writing. Never ask an important question orally. Always ask for a signed written response if it is an important question. And that's actually part of another presentation where I get into more of the legal aspects about what the individual should know and should be able to do in this particular situation. It goes on and talks about urban food production and security. You have in this area food citizenship, food councils, food concepts being enacted through local comprehensive plans, which, by the way, are official policy statements, just like the federal government has NEPA. Well, your comprehensive plan is an official document adopted by the elected officials, and then ordinances are written off of that, and then the responsibility to enforce that is given to a bureaucracy. So it's kind of a mirror of what's going on in the, at the federal level. And then public health. You better begin to ask, what does public health mean? Certainly, if you have too many gun ownerships in one area, that would be a sign that there are public health is not where it should be, and we need to see what we can do about bringing public health into sync with the politically correct thinking at the time. So now I've talked about greenhouse gas emissions and the climate change treaty, and I've talked about the soft cell. This is the hard cell. So now I have had some adverse reactions to this particular video. It was made in England during, I think, 2009. They wanted to encourage people to reduce their carbon footprint in the year 2010 by 10%. So if you're squeamish, has anybody seen this particular video? Okay, Karen, 2 people, all right. So this should be something interesting for you, but I'm letting you know that it is graphic. So here we go.
Right, kids, just before you go, there's a brilliant idea in the air that I'd like to run by you. Now, it's called 10-10. The idea is everyone starts cutting their carbon emissions by 10%. Thus, keeping the planet safe for everyone, eventually. Now, this hasn't got to be a huge thing, but I would love it if you and your families would think about doing something.
What sort of thing, miss?
Well, like getting your dad to insulate the loft, or taking your next holiday by train instead of flying, or buying energy-saving light bulbs.
We're thinking of using our car less. I'm going to cycle to school.
That's fantastic, Jemima. Now, no pressure at all, but it'd be great to get a sense of how many of you might do this. Just a rough percentage. That's fantastic. And those not? Philip and Tracy. That's fine, that's absolutely fine. Your own choice. Okay, class, thank you so much for today, and I will see you all tomorrow. Oh, just before you go, I just need to press this little button here. Now, everybody, please remember to read chapters 5 and 6 on volcanoes and glaciation. Except for Philip and Tracy, of course.
Well, hello everyone. It's great to be back here at Spurs. So many happy memories for me. Anyway, tell me something. What is this 10-10 thing the club is doing?
Well, it means that we're trying to cut our carbon emissions by 10% this year. And Tottenham Hotspur Football Club was the first to sign up.
We've changed the floodlights at White Hart Lane, so they're low energy. Lots of our fans are coming to matches on buses, trains, bikes and stuff, rather than coming by car.
I see. Whatever, I wouldn't do it. It seems like distraction from football to me.
That's just fine, David. You don't have to join in, just ignore it. No pressure. Right, lads, let's do some penalties.
10-10. Hundreds of thousands of people, schools, businesses, hospitals, movie stars, knitting circles, scout troops, presidents and governments, all tackling climate change in more than 40 countries. Care to join us? No pressure.
Is that okay?
Sounded great to me. Thanks,
okay.
Gillian.
Happy to help.
So what are you thinking of doing for 10-10 yourself?
What, are you kidding me? I thought that by doing this voiceover, that was my contribution.
Right. No, absolutely. No pressure.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Jesus.
Okay, I think that's graphic enough. Now, just so you don't miss it, there's actually an eyeball right there and there's one right there. These people are absolutely adamant about their position, and I want to make the point that during World War II, our soldiers who went across Europe and saw everything that the war had to offer, all those horrific sights, there was a decision made not to photograph that and send it back home to us who may, withdraw our support for prosecution of this war. But when those individuals that had seen everything that the war had to offer went into Auschwitz and those other places and saw what had happened when a socialist agenda had finally come to fruition, they said, we cannot sweep this under the carpet of history. We have to document this. Well, those photographs were made after the fact, after the socialists had come to power and done what they thought ought to be done. Well, we are at the great advantage now of seeing what they think ought to be done before they actually do it. I hope this is a motivating factor for you, because we all need to become aware that they are adamant about their position and they will prosecute it to the fullest. So now let me talk about what actually means to be within a sustainable community. And now I've gone from the national, kind of the state level, federal level, national, international, and state level. Now I want to come down and try to spend time actually on what it looks like to live in a sustainable community. Now I need to tell you where this particular slide came from. This was 1996. This was Habitat 2 held in Istanbul. And our delegates, of course, went over and agreed to this comprehensive plan that was adopted at this particular conference. This was Habitat 2. We're going to look at a quote from Habitat 1, which was 1976, where prominent Republicans were actually head of the delegates in that particular conference. But this one now actually has the definition for a sustainable community. So when you hear your local officials and primarily planners, I think, that would be schooling this, begin to talk about a sustainable community. And should you ask them what it means, they'll say invariably, well, it's whatever you want it to mean. You just come forward, have your public input put into this comprehensive plan, and we'll produce that future that you desire. Not true. This is definable objectives in this philosophy. This won one of those gold medals. There were 3 gold medals given out in 1996 at this conference, and this particular plan won one of those gold medals, and this is a graphics and a direct quote from that plan. And it says that a sustainable community is one which provides all of its own needs for air, water, land, food, fiber, and energy resources within the confines of its own site. I have serious doubts that this is ever going to come about, but believe me, the people that think that this should come about are striving to bring it about. Even the greenhouse gas emissions would be incorporated into all of this. This is a hard definition that they're striving for. So now I'm going to spool on up and talk about freedom of choice. What does it mean for freedom of choice for an individual that lives in a sustainable community? Now this is where I can. I always use publications from authorities. Now this is Under Construction Tools and Techniques for Local Planning. It is a production of the state of Minnesota. And on page 73 of this document is this quote right here, and it has the definition for freedom of choice. And it says people should be able to choose where they live and do business as long as they pay the identifiable cost of those choices and do not impose unaccounted for costs on other people or nature now or in the future. Now, I know that most people say, well, that's certainly not my definition of freedom of choice, but in fact, this definition incorporates 3 tenets of sustainable development. The first one is intergenerational equity. In other words, we're looking down the corridor of time. We determine that future generations require the same resources that we're currently exploiting from Mother Earth. That's their verbiage. They talk about man exploits the resource from Mother Earth. We don't utilize what the Creator has granted to us. We exploit Mother Earth's resources. So we have to limit what we exploit from Mother Earth in order to provide those resources for future generations. Intergenerational equity. Intragenerational equity is the distribution of all resources across the current generation that exist. And then we have something called species equity. And I talk about that frequently, and most people say, well, that's just something that may occur in the future. No, it's actually something that we have become acclimated with over a very long period of time because we have the Endangered Species Act. And it is an act in order to bring about something called species equity. We have the Council on Environmental Quality, which was established through NEPA. You can go out to the executive website, the president's website, go across the top. There's a tab that says the Council on Environmental Quality, and that is the council that actually establishes the criteria by which the toad frog has more rights than you do on your private property. A butterfly, a bird, makes no difference. They declare it, the federal agency prosecutes that against you, and it's part of species equity. It is a usurpation of God's throne because in our society, it used to be acknowledged that the Creator sits on His throne and has granted you and I certain unalienable rights. And here now we have a council of men that sit and determine what rights a toad frog has over the private property owner. So it's a usurpation of God's rightly gift to us, and we do not recognize it as being a religious law that has been enacted for a very long time in this country. We need sermons preached on it. Encourage your pastor to look at that. Now, this is a handout, and I want to specifically point that Chattanooga is listed on this. On the front page, it talks about the STAR community, and this is sustainability tools and assessment ratings for communities. In other words, Chattanooga is going to have to live up to what's on the backside. Now, when I say Chattanooga, I'm not talking about the corporation. I'm talking about you, the individual that lives here in Chattanooga, is going to be measured through your smart meters and other devices to determine whether or not you are in sync with the objective of this. Now, I can't go into all of what's on the back side, but if you look at the environment on the left-hand side, scroll down to next to the bottom, it talks about ambient noise and light. And I just want to bring out one point about ambient noise and light. There is the International Dark Sky Association. They have an approved list of lighting, exterior lighting fixtures. And of course, that's going to be one thing that you're going to adopt at some future date if you already haven't done that. Actually in the Athens, Alabama Comprehensive Plan, it talks about light pollution. And it says that nighttime light shall not go beyond your private property line. So this is one thing that's coming. Believe me, this is ludicrous sounding to a lot of people, but this is being enacted as we speak. So you'll have a nighttime light inspector that will likely come around and determine whether or not you need to get an approved fixture in order to come into compliance or receive a fine. Of course, I think the city would rather have the fine and just run you off your property. This is a slide that I use to divide the subject matter. Sustainable development covers literally everything about your life. It is comprehensive in every way. And I call this the wheel of sustainability. I really think that we need to have pastors and school teachers talking about what it means to adopt the tenets of this. For instance, if you're an electrician, you may want to look at how local ordinances are affecting your job performance and whether or not you can or cannot put in certain fixtures. For instance, I already know that Sylacauga in Alabama adopted the ICC codes, the International Code Council regulations on electrical appliances and various things for buildings. And there was an individual that bought a not a movie theater, but a DVD rental place. I can't remember the name of it, but at any rate, he wanted to turn it into a gymnasium. Well, because they had already adopted the new codes, he had to strip out all of the fixtures, which were in compliance and perfectly safe, and put in new appliances to bring it up to code and to give him a permit to operate within the city. He couldn't afford it, so it just shut down his business even though he had already purchased the property and began construction and renovation on the property. So this is just one concrete example of what happens when you adopt these rules and regulations. So I'm going to pick up and punch the button and we'll talk about various aspects. I can only have enough time to go through a few of these. And now I want to talk about food policy and sustainability and what it actually means in your community. Now, this is a slideshow from Clackamas County, Oregon, and we have a bullseye. And in the center of that bullseye is the urban center, and around that is the metropolitan food shed. All of the food that is consumed within the urban center is intended to be grown within that food shed. Any food, anything that's consumed by a human being brought from outside that food shed would have to have a mitigation fee. I like to think of it as a sin tax against Mother Earth, because in fact you'll see posters where you're degrading the environment by bringing in a carrot from California in just a few minutes. Now, I also want to point out that this has food shed, the wood shed, water shed, and energy shed. That goes right back to the definition that you saw in the beginning from 1996, where we define all of these different things that have to be created and garnered from within the community. And I think everybody that agrees with this sustainable development should be taken to the woodshed. This is a PowerPoint presentation that deals with nutrition, and this was actually presented to nutrition experts on the left coast. And I want to bring up just one tenet of this: social justice and environmental justice from seed to table. In other words, everything associated with putting the seed in the ground, growing it and getting it to your table has to be socially and environmentally just. So we have to look at species equity, we have to look at health care, we have to look at a living wage. All of those things have to be measured and become a component of that STAR community program that you have a handout for in order to be just within this new society we're creating. You're going to find that you're going to have a food policy council. Actually, Knoxville is the lead for this in the state of Tennessee. We have several programs in Alabama already dealing with food councils. They will write a food charter, and here are some of the concepts that will be on a food charter. And it says that the term food citizenship is defined as the practice of engaging in food-related behaviors that support rather than threaten a democratic, socially, and economically just and an environmentally sustainable food system. Well, the whole point about this one is that if you sit on the line, on the fence, so to speak, you're threatening your food citizenship. You need to fully adopt this and encourage your neighbor to adopt it in order to secure your food citizenship. And in fact, Lewis County, Tennessee, in 2009, passed a resolution proclaiming that everyone in the county should adopt the tenets of sustainable development and inspire their neighbor to do the same thing. Well, we made a presentation not too long ago, and I'm thankful to say that the county, not the city, but the county actually went back and rescinded that proclamation. There are stand-up individuals in public office in Lewis County, Tennessee. I hope that elected officials understand the breadth and scope of this and begin to think, I have made a mistake and I'm going to take the bull by the horn. In other words, the buck stops here on my elected post, and I'm going to stand and say, we're not going to have sustainable development in my community. That's exactly what Baldwin County, Lewis County, and Carroll County, Maryland have done. And I encourage everyone to become active and try to get their elected official to begin to understand what sustainable development is all about. Now, this next quote says that food democracy or food citizenship recognizes that consumers can identify interest of others. They are food workers, other consumers, future generations, and species, other species. So we again have species equity and intergenerational equity involved in this quote. Now, the reason I have this quote here is because this was in a thesis at Drexel University. Individual was striving to obtain a doctorate diploma from that university, and this was in her thesis. So you can see how far this has gotten, and I've used this quote for a number of years. So this is an increasing problem in our education industry, but because this is a concept now that is written on the hearts of individuals as they graduate from school and then join the public and come into public office and begin to write rules and regulations that they think ought to be incorporated. We have locavore. With any of these programs, we have new words and phrases, and this is merely one individual that has agreed to eat food, consume food that's grown within their food shed, which is generally speaking 100 miles. And you'll notice that the magazine article on the right here, this individual has used a mode of transportation that is economically and socially viable. They have not used gasoline that would restrict the access of future generations. So his plus sign now on his balance sheet is a good sign because he's not used gasoline that other generations would need. Food miles. Now, this is a poster that's intended to go up on a school wall, and I can see a teacher standing in front of a young group of people talking about the caution sign. The caution sign says, well, you should care because eating that carrot that was flown in from California has degraded the environment for a butterfly and a blue jay, and don't you feel guilty about that? So we're actually changing the paradigm of future citizens within our society. In a few minutes, you're going to see how far that actually has gone. Let me pick up now on transportation. I always thought that transportation was merely a means to get me from point A to point B, but no, this slide says transportation is not an end in of itself. It is a means by which we really incorporate socialist goals. And here now is a quote from the South Carolina transportation program, 2003 through 2022, and it says that equity issues include income distribution, urban and rural regional geographic differences, and by now you should understand that we're talking about intergenerational equity within the transportation system. So everything has to incorporate the tenets of this in order to be viable within this utopia. Now this is really a good quote. I've used this ever since I found it a couple of years ago. This is actually the front cover for this report produced by the Department of Transportation for the state of Tennessee. 2009, that's how far this goes back. And this quote says that the first approach starts with the premise that we need to convince you that you have to change the way you live. The primary objective of this approach is to reduce the vehicle miles traveled by restructuring society such that our needs for work, shopping, personal and social services, as well as recreation can be met in a local community by driving only short distances or getting on that bicycle that's actually across the street and going to get that loaf of bread instead of getting in your car and using gasoline that future generations would need. So by doing that now you get a plus. If you get in your car, you get a negative, a demerit on your balance sheet, which is really coming. We're really going to get that pretty soon. Let me move on now. Here now is one chapter, or excuse me, one paragraph from Agenda 21. It's actually paragraph 40.4. 1992 now, this is what they had to say. Commonly used indicators such as gross national product and measurements of individual resource flows or pollution flows do not provide an adequate indication of sustainability. It's what you actually extract in real time is what we want to measure. The next sentence, indicators of sustainable development need to be developed to provide solid basis for decision making at all levels of government, local, state, and national, in order to create a self-regulating governance system. Now here is what I think is a prime example of what I just talked about. This is the I-95 Coalition. And the map is actually on the upper left there, and it goes from Maine all the way to Florida, includes all of the transportation authorities in those states, also includes authorities in Canada. So we have a total of 35 transportation authorities involved in this program. Now here's what the name of this program is. It's Multi-State VMT-Based Fee Institutional and Legal Analysis. So if you're taking notes, you can actually go look it up. It's 34 pages long. And it basically says that what we want to do is to be able to take the information off of your onboard computer in your automobile. We all have GPS and computer systems in our automobiles. It knows where we were and when we were there. So when we drive up to a gasoline station and start pumping gasoline, that information about where we were is transferred to that great big database in the sky, and it determines, for instance, where you have driven through an ecologically sensitive area and you disturb the environment for a butterfly or a blue jay, and you must pay a mitigation fee. Or, for instance, we need to redistribute the amount of wealth in the community, and there are certain social injustices that have occurred in the community. We need to equal out all of that. So now, in order to receive the gasoline, they bump the price up. Now, this analysis actually goes into some discussion that they don't think some of the municipalities would buy into this. Well, in my opinion, as this thing continues down the path of absolute destruction, because I think that our economic system is literally being destroyed intentionally in order to bring this about, these local communities are not going to have to enact a local ordinance and face the individual that says we don't want another tax on gasoline or cigarettes or whatever it is. So in this case, the company, working hand in glove with the government, in order to right these perceived wrongs, will just bump up the price. You want to buy the gasoline, you're going to pay the price. So it's a no-sale situation. The local community holds out their hand, and the corporation puts a check in their hand. We may never know that this has actually been enacted, but this is being talked up not only on the East Coast, but in Louisiana and California. And as we drive more fuel-efficient automobiles, we find that the state governments are griping because we're not paying enough taxes, because the fuel-efficient automobiles use less tax, so we have less money and revenue for street improvements and maintenance. So this makes perfect sense to enact this under that fold of cover, so to speak. RFID, radio frequency identification device. How many people know what I just talked about? Okay, we got about a third, maybe a half. It is a device that has been in the works for quite some time, goes all the way back. I think I first read about it in the mid-90s. It is the size, typically the size of a grain of rice. And here are some examples now. We have on the upper left a paper container that actually has an RFID radio frequency device in it. Then the medicine cabinet on a medicine bottle on the right. It's in the cap. The flip-flop on the left, bottom left, has one of these devices. And then the coat, lapel. Now this makes perfect sense for the average retailer, because this device has the color, size, material, all of the description of this coat or whatever it is, that is available in real time to the merchant. So if I purchase this coat and walk out, that information about what left the shelf is put into the database for the merchant. So he has a real-time device that he can actually reorder. As a matter of fact, he doesn't have to do anything. If it's a hot-selling item, it's automatically deducted and then reordered in order to fulfill his merchandise on his shelf. But it also has the ability to transmit much more information. And that's now what we want to look at, how it actually interacts with the community, because this is something that's going to work together with some of that vehicle miles traveled devices that are already in your car. And this is a slideshow from a company that actually sells the device. And we have a reader on this shelf that reads each individual bottle, knows when the bottle was placed on the shelf, knows the expiration date of the contents, whatever information that the designer wants to know about the contents is put on that chip and read into this reader, and it's great for inventory control. But it's also great for the merchant and the grocery business, because now each one of these packages in this grocery cart has an RFID chip in it. In other words, it's passive. Then there are two basic kind of chips that I know about. One is passive. In other words, it has no power device in it. So as you go through the checkout, and by the way, you wouldn't even have to check out, just go through the doors, leaving the grocery store, and there's a reader that scans each one of these chips, and that energy beam is bounced back and describes what you're walking out the store with. Of course, it's already in your lapel and your underwear and everything else that you have on, so we automatically really know who you are and who just walked out the grocery store. So this is one way to track all of the devices and things that are in society currently. The smart fridge is one thing that has been a hot topic of discussion, because we also have smart stoves, smart washing machines, and again, smart fridges. So now when you leave the grocery store and you come home with, let's say, a gallon of ice cream, and that chip is on that gallon of ice cream, it has been designed to determine the temperature. And let's say that you took too long getting home, and the allowable temperature now has gone above the acceptable consumption temperature. And when you put it in your smart refrigerator, it reads that information, displays on the screen that it's not fit for consumption, and you have to dispose of it in a proper manner. Well, I was talking to a salesman for RFID chips and asked him if that was a practical application. He said, oh yes, absolutely. Well, it wasn't long ago, I was in Chattanooga, and David Crockett was making a presentation to the Tea Party here on sustainable development. And during the presentation, he was talking about the triple bottom line. Now, you're going to see a definition of the triple bottom line in just a few minutes. He did not describe what the triple bottom line means. But during the Q&A, I asked him, how would the triple bottom line actually interact with the RFID chip. He automatically knew what RFID meant and what I was referring to. I thought that he would, because of the audience, would back up and not answer the question. But he just bubbled over and he said, oh, we already have readers on trash cans so that we now know when you have adequately disposed of, environmentally safe disposed of, the containers, and you'll get a credit for it. Of course, he didn't say the reverse, you'll get a demerit if you don't dispose of. So if that information on that ice cream container is transferred to that database in the sky, then the reader is looking for the proper disposing of that ice cream container, and you don't dispose of it, there may be a demerit coming. I have no idea whether how important that information might be to the system, but you could wind up, I guess, with a code enforcement officer coming to make sure that you did in fact dispose of it. And here now is the last slide in that particular presentation, where we start out with a manufacturer, go through the transportation system, and then wind up in the trash container with the reader in it, so that we actually know that you're disposing of everything properly according to the tenets of sustainable development. This is another tracking device. I was in Mobile making a presentation. This is the South Alabama Regional Planning Commission, mirroring what's going on up here with your Thrive 2055 program. And this is a map that shows cell phone usage for 1 month now. This is 1 month, 2012. They garnered the information from the cell phone in order to determine where trips began and where they ended. So it's not just RFID chips, it's your cell phone that tracks and determines your trip mileage. And they want to know this information so that they can begin to fashion ordinances in order to encourage you to reduce the amount of travel, in order to determine where bus routes ought to go. And of course, if they put the bus routes there and you don't use it, then that would be perhaps a demerit in this new society we're building. Smart meters. Most people know about smart meters on electricity, but we're also talking about natural gas, we're talking about water and sewage. All of these things have to be measured, and let me talk about SB 150, because SB 150 was sponsored by Senator Taylor in Alabama. Now, in Alabama, we already have a law on the books that says that we can't take your electronic device, your cell phone, and other electronic devices and garner information from you. It's an invasion of your privacy. So the first part of this bill actually said we're going to take that penalty for doing this and we're going to strengthen it. Instead of being, say, a Class C felony, it's going to be a Class A felony. Except, in the last paragraph, we're excluding all of the utility companies. So you had to read like several pages in order to get to that last paragraph and know that the utility companies were being excluded from putting a smart meter on your house and then determining your patterns of life about how you live and when you turn on the electric light to light up the coffee pot and other things in your home. So all that information now that they can gather, sell to whoever they want to for whatever reason they want to, and it's actually an invasion of privacy, and you won't be able to charge the power company. Now, let me talk about social health, and we're actually going to get into the triple bottom line. This was Director Bosworth. He was director of the USDA in 2003. He talked about the report that his department had to submit to the federal government every year. This was a yearly report in 2003. It is now a biannual report. And he was talking about the Sustainable Forest Report, and he was talking about how social, economic, and environmental aspects, those are the three aspects of sustainable development. Typically, you'll see three circles, each one representing one issue of sustainable development, social, economic, and environmental. And he says where this comes together, it has earned its own name, the triple bottom line. This is exactly what David Crockett was talking about when I saw his presentation. Didn't explain it. I'm going to try to explain what the triple bottom line is all about. Frequently, also, you'll see people, profit, and planet. So that's another concept that goes along with the triple bottom line. Now, this is a global program. So this is obviously a slideshow not from here, it's from Japan. And we have social, economic, and environmental. And we're not using a circle, we're using a triangle. And out of that triangle is something called happiness. And it is the basis for the triple bottom line. And it says to be sustainable, society must satisfy the requirements of the triple bottom line. This is mandatory. This is a shall. If you're reading legal documents, remember shall and must. It's not a may, it must. You must satisfy the requirements of the triple bottom line. However, that alone is not sufficient. The feelings of people living in society are also important. Even if the triple bottom line requirements are satisfied, society is not sustainable if you feel unhappy about what's happening to you. Therefore, we define a sustainable society as one that satisfies the triple bottom line requirements and makes you feel happy. Now, this slideshow presentation goes through all of the column there on the left: environment, safety, health, comfort, economy, and so forth, and happiness. And it describes each one of those. Under health is a universal health care system. That's one thing that really should make you happy. Now, if you're disgruntled about this, I don't have any idea what may happen, but you're not in the norm here. So just remember that. Now, GSF, what does GSF stand for? It is Gross Social Feel-Good Index. So I do have frequently people that find that humorous, but actually I was looking at a comprehensive plan for Washington County, Virginia, that was produced. The survey was taken in the year 2000, and it is a feel-good survey. It doesn't say that, but it is a survey to determine the feelings of the people towards a comprehensive plan. So it is a fulfillment of the very same criteria, except in other parts of this globe, for instance in Australia or any of the other English-speaking countries. If you type in local Agenda 21, LA 21, just LA 21, you're going to find local communities that tout the benefits of all this. They're open and above board far more in those countries because they have a different system. In Japan, they don't have representative government. If we have representatives that we recognize are pushing this agenda, we're likely to vote them out of office. Not so in these other places. It's a completely different system, different attitude. Let me pick up now on land use planning, greening development, and the Biodiversity Treaty. Now, this is one of those three treaties that are inherent in Agenda 21. It has not been fully ratified. In other words, the Senate has not adopted it, but that makes no difference. This is being implemented as we speak. Now, this slideshow came from EPA Region 4. This is the first slide that begins to talk about what the Ecological Framework is all about. And basically what they want to do is to take 50% of the continental United States, set it aside for human-free zones. No human is to be allowed in 50% of the continental United States. 10% buffer zone. Then the remaining 40% is where we're going to be moved over a long period of time. And I think $10 for a gallon of gasoline will be a great encouragement for people to move out of the rural area. Then we have all manner of regulations adopted under the ICC codes that have to bring you into compliance with this. It'll make it difficult to live in the rural sections. Now, also in this, there is something called invasive species. So all species that were brought here by European man are considered invasive and have to be removed. And all animals, predator or not, that were here when European man came have to be reintroduced. Now, I know that when I grew up, there were no wolves, bears in my area in Alabama. They have been reintroduced. You will see them, and I actually have talked to farmers that have had their cattle attacked by wolves and wildcats that were not there when I grew up. So these animals have already been reestablished within the Southeast, and the Southeast, by the way, was the first section of the country to be mapped. Now, this is a slide that is to describe basically the tenets of this, and we have one eco hub here and one eco hub on the other side. These are generally 5,000 acres or larger, but you could have a stakeholder committee to come to your property and determine that a mud puddle is a wetland and declare it a no human intrusion zone, and actually that you have to protect it. Well, that's part and parcel of what's going to be discussed in just a minute with a red cockaded woodpecker, because that's one way of implementing this on the private landowner. Now, what they want to do is, the federal government that is, wants to take an animal and allow him to walk from this eco hub through this interconnecting corridor to that eco hub and never see a structure created by the hand of man, never hear a human voice, never know that man was ever on this earth. And it is the fruition of something called evolution, because man has evolved to a status on this earth where he's actually destroying it, and government now has a responsibility to reestablish the balance between man and nature. So this, again, goes back to a religious concept that has been enacted through legislation. Now, they want to do this in order to prevent the gene pool from degrading itself over the next 1,000 years, because one animal might actually intermate and degrade the gene pool. So that is an effort of man to reestablish what he perceives ought to be. Now, those were my words. Now, here's a slide from the federal government that I hope really brings it home, because I'm just going to go what they have to say. They, being the federal government, said that the corridors link core areas wind through human-dominated land like agricultural or development, and this allows animal, seed, and pollen movement between core areas. Linkages calculated separately between forest, wetland, and aquatic core areas. When Alabama passed the Anti-Agenda 21 law, we got a free trip, actually, to Australia. And when we got down there, they were talking about the Biodiversity Treaty. They didn't recognize it as such. All they knew is that the Coral Sea, the size of Texas, had been declared an aquatic core area, and the Australians were not allowed to fish in the Coral Sea anymore. If you look at the maps that are produced in this program for the Southeast, you will find that all of the coastline around the Southeast is actually an aquatic core area. I just talked to a commercial fisherman in Bon Secour, Alabama. The people that do sports fishing are now limited to 27 days a year. Believe me, you can't make a living on sports fishing and charter boats on 27 days. You won't be able to pay the cost of keeping your boat up. So that's just one way of incrementally taking from us our living and our way of life. Now, this is a handout for you, because it goes in, this is the other handout that I have. Let me, well, I don't see where it is right now, but at any rate, Nancy gave you one, and it goes into what requirements are looked at by the private landowner. In other words, if you have a nesting cockaded woodpecker on your property, they want to set aside 200 acres for that nesting bird. You can't disturb it. As a matter of fact, you have to do very specific things on your property in order to secure that habitat for that nesting bird. Now, this is just one species. This is just one of those means and ways in order to take your private property rights from you without declaring eminent domain, because if eminent domain is declared, they have to pay you for those rights. But they can do it incrementally, and by the way, you likely won't get any sympathy from the news media. You won't, if anything, they may actually ridicule you or just give you 30-second sound bites. So you're not going to get too much in the news media at all. This is all going to be word of mouth through people like you that coming to presentations. And believe me, I don't want to keep doing this. I want each and every one of you to become an outspoken individual about these issues and learn about it within your own sphere of influence. So take this to your farmer, or anybody that has acreage that might have a red cockaded woodpecker, and be aware of what regulations are required. These are direct quotes on those handouts from the state of Texas that mirror what the federal government has to say about endangered species. Now, we have a number of programs. For instance, this one is the Forever Wild Land Trust, and there are land trusts all over this country dealing with this concept of preserving land for future generations. Now, the Forever Wild Land Trust in Alabama, and this is a map of that from the Forever Wild Trust. By the way, this was a constitutional amendment for us. Unfortunately, tons of money, millions of dollars were spent in order to convince the public that this was a good program. It is a sustainable development program, and all of the red that you see on that map is currently land that is set aside through land trust or federally protected or state protected land currently. I'm going to punch the button, and all of the green, now these are not maps that I produced or anybody that I know produced, these are maps from the federal government, and how much land is actually going to be set aside in Alabama for this program. So all of the green, no matter what shade it is no human intrusion zones. This is North Alabama, Northeast Alabama, and you can't see it. It's just too far away, and I'm having a hard time to see it. But that's Jackson County, Jackson and DeKalb County, which is part of Thrive 2055. And this is how much land is to be set aside for no human intrusion zones. Again, this is the federal government's map, not mine. So let me now talk about Habitat 1. Remember, Habitat 2 had the definition for a sustainable community. Well, this now is a quote from Habitat 1. But first, look at this graphics from Habitat 2. It is Mother Earth gently caressing human settlements and protecting them. So it says, it has 1,000 words in this one graphics. Now, when I first ran across this quote, I didn't believe it. I read it back in late 90s, I think it was. Henry Lamb actually was the first one that published this, to my knowledge. And I said, no, this couldn't be. No American would go to a conference anywhere in this world and agree to this particular quote. So I wanted to disprove him. I said, this guy's just absolutely a bald-faced liar. This does not exist. Found out that there is a depository library for the United Nations across the globe. Tallahassee, University of Florida at Tallahassee was one of those depository libraries. I sent off for a hard copy. Indeed, this is an accurate quote from this global plan of action. And it says that land, because of its unique nature and crucial role it plays in human settlements, cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. So in that very first sentence, we have to do away with the free enterprise system. Just doesn't fit the mode and modus operandi for this new transformation. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument in accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. So think about when you drive up to that gasoline pump, and it accesses all of that information about you, determines what profit you have made off of a parcel of land. And if it's deemed to be socially unjust, then you have committed an act of social injustice, and you have to pay that mitigation fee right then. Because if we allow this to continue, the implementation of development scheme, social justice, urban renewal and development, the provisions of decent dwellings and healthy conditions for the people can only be achieved if land is used in the interests of society as a whole. And it finishes this quote by saying, public control of land use is therefore indispensable. So when you hear your local planner who has been well schooled in all this, and he talks about land use control, he is reflecting this concept, and you need to pull him to task, because if you leave that meeting without defining exactly what he's talking about, you will have agreed to something that you have no concept, the ramifications of it at some future date. Okay, let me kind of run through this real quick. Now, I speak to a lot of audiences, and most of them are white. Now, let me say that we are a house divided. This has already hit the minority community really, really hard. Typically, they don't have the resources to fend for themselves just like anybody else can. We need to begin to understand what brings us together. Property rights should be one of those things that would bring us together. And this is not, as Karen said in the beginning, this is not Democrat and Republican. This is an American concept that we have private property rights granted to us by the Creator. They are unalienable rights, and we need to press that and push this out in a further audience so that we have a much greater constituency when we begin to talk to our elected officials. Along those lines now, this DVD is available. It's online. This is Joe Neal, who articulates the use and usefulness and what it really means to own private property. So in just a few minutes, he's going to tell you exactly what private property rights are all about.
What we're facing is a plan for growth and development that's being implemented by County Council here called Vision 2020. It is a flavor or a type of smart growth legislation. And what that simply means is that a vision has been developed by planners for this area. They want to dictate how growth will occur or not occur in this area. And by that result, who will profit or not profit by that plan. And what this plan does, very simply, is to lay out a vision of this area that includes the evolution or creation of villages. They want to force all growth in this area into villages, high density, high population villages. Around these villages will be drawn what are called urban boundary zones. These urban boundary zones will delineate the village from the surrounding countryside. And those two entities, the village and the countryside, will be treated differently by this legislation. Property that is not in the village will find that its value is lessened, reduced, or eliminated. Property within the village will find that that property will gain or rise in value because that's the only place where development will be allowed to occur. Now, as an example, recently we had a resident here who put in an application to build a barber shop in his little community. He happened to own some property on the side of a highway in a rural area here. He was told that he could not. That instead, if he wanted a barber shop, he had to go into the little village nearby, or little community, it wasn't even a village, and purchase a site there or negotiate with someone who already has a site to allow him to put up a barbershop. Now, what that did was to render his property useless. The purpose in owning property is to find some way to make that property produce wealth, whether it's growing a crop or putting a small business on it. For rural people, particularly in this area, who have never had the opportunity to translate their holdings into wealth, to be told at this point that that can never happen, that they will be denied access to water and sewer, that the only place that water and sewer will be able to go will be in the villages that are designated by this plan. That's the problem. It creates a two-tiered system of people and societies here. Those who are in the village will be allowed to accumulate wealth, their property will rise in value. Those of us who are in the rural areas, who are not in the village, will find that the property values are dropping, that we're not allowed to do anything with the property, practically, that will produce any wealth. That robs these property owners of wealth. It's a takings, in my opinion, because of that.
Now, I hope that this brings it home that this, in fact, is a religion, because this is the Ark of Hope. It was designed to be identical to the Ark of the Covenant. It has eyes on either side of four corners of the box where you slide the poles through so you can pick it up and not be struck by lightning. It was created out of one tree in Germany, shipped over to the New England area, and hand carried to the United Nations Meditation Room, where it sat in state on the left in that photograph for approximately 6 months. I have photographs of people standing around this box. It appears that they are praying. It appears in the photograph on the right that this individual is placing something before it as if it was an altar. I don't know that for sure, but it certainly looks that way. Now, in this box was the Earth Charter. There is a movement to try to force or encourage, let's say, countries to adopt the Earth Charter and incorporate it into their constitutions. If we have a constitutional call, amendment call, or a constitutional convention call, I should say, in this country, I can assure you there are going to be individuals that are going to be pushing to have the Earth Charter incorporated into our Constitution. One country in South America already has done that. Now, this is what Gorbachev had to say about the Earth Charter. He says, "My hope is that this charter will be a kind of 10 Commandments, a Sermon on the Mount that provides a guide for human behavior toward the environment in the next century." So this truly is, in my opinion, at certain levels, a religion. Now, this is, at the top of this are slides that are emblems that get into organizations that actually want to have this incorporated as hard law within our society. Now, this is how you wind up with a society that actually believes we should adopt this.
Together
2 generations there. There were the parents, the adults that have already adopted this philosophy and are encouraging their children to adopt the very same philosophy. Believe me, this will transform this society quicker than anything you can imagine. These people will turn out and go into public office, and if we don't learn what questions we should ask to understand their philosophy, we'll vote for them, and we'll put them into office, and then we'll have to put up with the rules and regulations that they adopt. Let me now come down to the end of this program and speak to what is government. I know that not Jefferson, but Washington said government is fire. If you don't treat it appropriately, you're going to get burned, and that's very true. But this is the best definition that I have run across for government. Properly constituted under God's law, government is the transfer of specific obligations and responsibilities. You see, that which the Creator has granted to us, we cannot transfer. We can only transfer obligations and responsibility. And we, you and I, designate through a state charter what those obligations are. Now, government becomes a corporation, a legal fiction, an idea that is described in a written format. The written document is a charter, a contract, a constitution which contains the mission statement that spells out the purpose of government. Now, I have probably read most Declaration of Rights from various state constitutions, more so than most anybody I know. And believe me when I say that it is my firm opinion that the Declaration in our state constitution for the state of Alabama has the very best description of the object of government. In other words, what is government there for? And here is Article 1, Section 35 of the Alabama Constitution, and it says that the sole object and only legitimate end of government is to protect future generations from the greed of the current generation. Well, it really doesn't say that. It says that it is protect you and I in the enjoyment of life, liberty, and property. Now, everybody would recognize life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But this was a phrase that was actually coined by John Locke. He was the third most quoted individual in the founding era. Everybody in the 1700s would have known this phrase and the origin of it. Now, Jefferson came along and said it's redundant. You can't have property and life. That's the redundant concept, because without life there can be no property. So he substituted the pursuit of happiness. Now let me pose a concept, a thought to you, is that if government will not protect the first aspect of property among the most innocent individuals in this society, they are certainly not going to protect your private property rights as an adult. And of course, when government assumes other functions, which it already has done, it is usurpation and oppression. So with that now, I hope that we have many, many questions and we can stand until we run out of time.